Hello and welcome to our 7-8 minutes of weekly Torah talk. Our guest today is Rabbi Nina Mandel of Congregation Beth El in Sunbury, Pennsylvania. Hello, Rabbi. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Hi.
Our parsha is Shemot, the first parsha of the second book. And in this parsha, the children of Israel multiply in Egypt. Pharaoh enslaves them and orders the Hebrew midwives to kill all male babies at birth. A child is born to Yocheved, the daughter of Levi, and her husband Amram. This baby boy is placed in a basket on the river. His sister watches him from afar. Then Pharaoh's daughter finds the boy. She takes him and raises him as her son. She names him Moses. When Moses leaves the palace, he discovers the hardship of his brethren, kills an Egyptian that is beating a Hebrew. He then has to flee to Midian. There he marries Yitro's daughter and becomes a shepherd of his father-in-law's flocks. God appears to Moses in a burning bush at the foot of Mount Sinai and instructs him to go to Pharaoh and demand, "Let my people go." Moses' brother Aaron is appointed to serve as a spokesman for Moses, and the two go to Egypt to speak with Pharaoh, but the king refuses to accommodate their request. The first pasuk of the parsha says, "Ve'ele shmot bnei Yisrael haba'im Mitzrayma et Yaakov ish uveito ba'u." And these are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob. Each man and his household came. So, Rabbi, let's talk about this scene at the burning bush. Moses is telling God that he is not a man of words. Why would God insist on sending such men to such mission?
I think it's...
You cannot speak for God, you say.
I cannot speak, yes. Who am I to speak for God? But, what strikes me in the story is that the way that Moses approaches his own sense of power and his own sense of justice. So when he gets to this moment at the burning bush, he has no problem turning and going to the bush and approaching it because he can see it. But it seems that when God asks him to do this thing, this unseen thing, he has trouble imagining himself seeing it and doing it and being worthy of doing it. So he, in the first part of the parsha, he does 3 times he intervenes for justice. He kills the Egyptian who's beating the Hebrew slave. Then he tries to intervene, right, with the 2 slaves who are fighting.
Right.
And then he runs off and he fends off the shepherds at the well in Midian before, and that's where he meets his wife, another beloved wife at a well.
Right.
But then, so then when God says to him, go down, the people are suffering, and he says, I don't know, who am I? Why should I do this? He seems to have so much hesitancy.
Maybe because he feels that he's a man of action and not articulate enough to speak, to be a spokesperson for a people.
But he doesn't get to that till last, right? That's the kind of the last, or he comes to that awareness that that the hesitancy is about the speech. Last, first he says, "Who am I? How are people going to believe me? How will they know? Who are you?"
You think that the issue of articulation is just he's looking for excuses and this is his last resort?
I think it's either the last resort or the last one he realizes. I think it's a difference between in the earlier part where he can see something, he sees injustice. So the text is besiv lotam, like he sees into he sees into their suffering,
right.
And then so he's able to act. But when he's so far removed from the suffering, he hears about it from God. He hears that the people are suffering, your people are suffering, but he can't act just on the hearing. He has to get in there and see it.
So when God sends him back, it becomes easier for him to act because then he's back at the crime scene and he can.
Yes, I think that once he actually sees what's going on, it's easier for him. He can imagine. It's almost as if he can't picture it, as if he's removed himself from it, from the suffering, and so he can't picture it.
Right. And it's interesting. You mentioned before that this parsha, when we accompany Moses on his way to the burning bush, we see him act or take action time and again. But in our collective imagination, I don't think we picture Moses as this, big fighter, semi bully who jumps into action whenever he sees injustice.
Yeah.
We think of him as a prophet, as a speaker.
Yeah, he's more of that leader figurehead
So,
type.
so is there a way for us to reconcile his younger, more maybe juvenile way of behavior and his later leadership?
Yeah, I'm sure there must be. Uh, yeah, whether it's maybe it's that maturity or the growth or just some people are better at some things than others. Some people are better when they can act and respond, and then other people are stirred by the words of or hearing about suffering. So maybe that's but that's what it is. I mean, I think maybe he's grown out of it. Maybe his younger self was more short-tempered or more impulsive, and by the time it gets to the moment at the sneh, that he's sort of stepped back a little bit from that impulsiveness.
And thinking about the two incidents in which he intervenes in Egypt, are we supposed to be impressed with these incidents or alarmed by them? Or does it yet again showing us a biblical character in all of its complexity?
Yeah, I think that we're supposed to be both. I think that the first incident we're supposed to be impressed by, right? He intervenes, he kills the bad guy. The second incident, I'm not sure, are we impressed or are we disturbed by? Is because he's intervening, but then he gets turned on by the two Hebrew slaves who say, oh, now you're going to kill me, and and then he just kind of runs off. So whether there's meant to be a different sense of honor that gets involved in that, or we're meant to understand that he is able to see injustice, whether it's in other people or within his own people. That he was able to understand that even though these were Hebrew slaves and he saw them as his people, that he understood that they themselves were not good. They were doing something evil, and that there needed an intervention.
Right, right. And as we transition from the first book, from Bereshit, to the second book, and from the heroes of the first book, from Abraham and Yitzchak and Jacob and Joseph, on to Moses, is he? It's a weird question. Is he as likable as the characters of Bereshit?
I think not yet. I think he becomes more likable. But I mean, his whole story is all maturation. His birth and his maturation is told in one chapter.
Right.
It's so quick. We don't learn that much about his inner life until later. And I think then he becomes. I mean, I find him, the most likable when he's complaining to God about, I'm Sheriff, it's like, why did you give me these people? I'm not cut out for this. Then I think, he shows his human self, this very real self. But I think early on, he's a figure more than anything. thought about it, but yes.
Rabbi, thank you so much. Something to think about on Shabbat. So thank you and Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.